Sir, you're a security risk. Step aside.
He's a risk! Stop him! I'm the owner's son.
The owner's son?
A 17-year-old boy clutching a first-class ticket for a flight to London is about to embark on the trip of a lifetime. He's an honor student, a budding aerospace engineer, and he's wearing his favorite comfortable hoodie for the long flight. But to the airline staff, none of that matters. They see his clothes, the color of his skin, and they make a judgment. They whisper the words, security risk. They watch his every move, and in a moment of shocking prejudice, they do the unthinkable. What they don't know is that the young man they're harassing isn't just any passenger. He is Elijah Scott, the only son of Samuel Scott, the founder, owner, and CEO of the very airline they work for. This isn't just a story about a misunderstanding. It's the story of a system-wide failure, a father's quiet fury, and a reckoning at 35,000 feet. Elijah Scott felt the familiar thrum of the airport before he even saw the first departure screen. It was a unique symphony of rolling suitcase wheels, distant, garbled PA announcements, and the low, expectant murmur of 1,000 different journeys beginning at once. For Elijah John F. Kennedy, International Airport wasn't just a place of transit. It was a cathedral dedicated to his one true passion, aviation. At 17, he wasn't like other kids whose walls were plastered with posters of athletes or musicians. His were covered with cross-sections of jet engines, historical timelines of Boeing and Airbus, and a framed autographed photo of a test pilot he'd met at an airshow. He could tell you the maximum takeoff weight of an A380 and the cruising speed of a 787 Dreamliner. He didn't just want to fly. He wanted to build the machines that conquered the sky. This trip was the culmination of a promise. His father, Samuel Scott, was a man who seemed to command time itself, but what little he had, he tried to give to his son. They were scheduled to attend the Farnborough International Air Show outside London, a pilgrimage for aviation geeks. For Elijah, it was paradise. "First class, Mr. Scott," the check-in agent said with a professional if slightly detached smile, handing back his passport and ticket. "Lounge access is on the 3rd level, just past security. Have a wonderful flight on Stellara Air." Elijah gave a polite nod. "Thank you." Stellara Air, his father's creation. He remembered when it was just a dream sketched on napkins at their kitchen table. Samuel Scott, a brilliant logistics expert who had worked his way up from the baggage claim at LAX, had seen a gap in the market for a premium airline that prioritized customer experience above all else. He'd poured his life savings and a mountain of investor capital into it, naming it Stellara for the stars he was aiming for. Now it was one of the most respected transatlantic carriers in the world. Elijah, however, rarely flew in the lap of luxury his father's airline provided. Samuel insisted he learn the value of things. Most of their family trips were in premium economy. "You appreciate the destination more when the journey isn't seamless," his father would say with a wink. But this trip was different. It was a celebration of Elijah's early acceptance into MIT's aerospace engineering program. First class was the reward. Dressed in simple black joggers, a pair of pristine Nike sneakers, and a grey MIT hoodie he'd bought on his campus visit, Elijah looked more like a college kid heading home than a premium passenger. He kept to himself, his noise-cancelling headphones securely over his ears, listening to a podcast about Ad Scotts in composite materials. He was unassuming an observer by nature, content to be an anonymous face in the crowd. As he made his way through the bustling terminal, he felt a slight pang of loneliness. His dad was supposed to have flown out with him, but a last-minute crisis with a new fleet acquisition had kept him in New York for another day. Samuel had been genuinely apologetic. "I'll be on the next flight out, I promise, Eli," he'd said over the phone, the exhaustion evident in his voice. "The suite at the hotel is all set up. Just get there, get some rest, and I'll see you for breakfast. I'm so proud of you, son. You earned this." Elijah understood. The airline was his father's life's work, a demanding and ever-present entity. He navigated the security line with practiced ease, his laptop and electronics placed neatly in the grey bins. He didn't set off any alarms. He was just another traveller. Inside the opulent Stellara Polaris lounge, he found a quiet corner overlooking the tarmac. He pulled out his notebook filled with sketches of winglet designs and calculations for fuel efficiency. Outside, a Stellara Air Boeing 747-300ER was being serviced a majestic metal bird preparing to soar. He watched the ground crew, the fuel trucks, the baggage handlers, every part of the intricate ballet, feeling a sense of connection. This was his legacy in a way. Not the wealth or the luxury, but the magnificent engineering of it all. He was so engrossed that he nearly missed the boarding announcement for flight SA-101 to London Heathrow. Packing his notebook away, he finished his glass of water and headed for the gate, a quiet excitement bubbling in his chest. In just a few hours he'd be in London, one step closer to the air show, one step closer to his future. The world felt full of promise, as vast and open as the sky itself. He had no idea that in a matter of minutes, that sky would begin to shrink and the promise would curdle into a nightmare. The atmosphere at Gate B24 was a controlled chaos of families trying to keep their children in line, business travelers impatiently tapping on their laptops, and vacationers buzzing with excitement. The boarding process for Stellara Air Flight SA-101 had begun, starting with passengers needing special assistance and families with young children. Elijah waited patiently for Group 1 to be called, his boarding pass clutched in his hand. He stood off to the side, scrolling through flight data on an app on his phone, checking the tailwinds over the Atlantic. Now boarding Group 1, our first class and Polaris business passengers, a crisp voice announced over the intercom. That was his cue. Elijah joined the short organized line, standing behind a man in a tailored suit and a woman with a designer handbag. When it was his turn, he stepped forward and handed his passport and boarding pass to the gate agent. Her name tag read, Brenda. Brenda Walsh was a woman in her late 40s who looked like she'd been working this gate for 20 years and had disliked 19 of them. Her eyes, magnified by her glasses, flickered from his boarding pass to his face, then down to his grey hoodie and joggers and back up again. A tiny, almost imperceptible frown line appeared between her eyebrows. "First class?" she asked, her tone implying it was a question of possibility, not confirmation. "Yes, ma'am," Elijah replied politely. She scanned his boarding pass. The machine beeped green, but she didn't hand it back. Instead, she held on to it, her gaze narrowing. "Can I see your ID again?" Elijah handed over his passport. She studied the photo, then looked at him, then back at the photo. "Scott," she muttered, tasting the name. She seemed to be searching for something, a discrepancy, a reason for the nagging feeling she had. In her mind, the image of a 17-year-old black kid in a hoodie didn't align with seat 2A in the most exclusive cabin of the aircraft. "Is there a problem?" Elijah asked, his voice steady, though a knot of unease was beginning to form in his stomach. "I've been instructed to perform additional random security screenings." She said the word random, sounding anything but. She gestured to a sterile table off to the side. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step over here and empty your pockets and your carry-on." Elijah's eyes darted around. No one else from the first-class line was being pulled aside. The man in the suit was already halfway down the jet bridge. He could feel the stares of the passengers in the next boarding group. A flush of heat crept up his neck. This wasn't random. "Okay," he said, keeping his voice even. He walked to the table and began to comply. He placed his phone, wallet, and headphones on the table. He unzipped his backpack and took out his laptop, his notebook, and a calculus textbook. Brenda picked up his notebook, her fingers flipping through the pages with a distinct lack of care. Her eyes scanned the complex equations and detailed technical drawings. "What is all this?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion. "It's for my studies," Elijah explained. "I'm an aspiring aerospace engineer." The explanation did not seem to soothe her. If anything, it seemed to heighten her alarm. To her, these weren't the doodles of a student. They were schematics, technical, suspicious. She then picked up his phone, which he had left unlocked on the flight tracking app. The screen showed a map of the North Atlantic with flight paths overlaid. "And this? Why are you tracking flight patterns?" "I just find it interesting," Elijah said, the knot in his stomach tightening into a cold fist of dread. "It's a hobby." He was trying to be calm, to be respectful, but he was acutely aware of the scene he was becoming. A young black man being publicly searched, his belongings, scrutinized, his intentions, questioned. The whispers started to ripple through the waiting crowd. Brenda ignored his explanation. She held up a finger, signaling for a uniformed airport security officer, a stern-looking man named Officer Thorne, to approach. "We have a situation," she said to Thorne, her voice low, but carrying a sense of self-importance. "Passenger is exhibiting suspicious behavior. He has detailed drawings of aircraft and is tracking flight routes on his phone. He seems very nervous." Elijah stared at her, dumbfounded. Nervous? Of course he was nervous. He was being singled out and interrogated in front of 100 people. Officer Thorne took over his demeanor, all business. "Son, what's your reason for travel today?" "I'm visiting my father in London," Elijah said, his voice now trembling slightly with a mixture of anger and humiliation. "We're going to an air show." "Your father?" Thorne asked. "Where is he?" "He's flying out tomorrow. He had a last-minute business meeting." Brenda scoffed softly, as if she'd heard that excuse 1,000 times. She leaned in and whispered to Thorne loud enough for Elijah to hear. "The ticket was paid for with a Centurion card, but it was booked last minute. It just feels off. He's a potential security risk." That phrase hit Elijah like a physical blow. Security risk. He who loved planes more than anything. He whose father had built this airline on the principle of treating every passenger with dignity. He was being labeled a threat, all because of his hoodie, his hobby, and the color of his skin. After a few more minutes of fruitless searching through his calculus homework and wing designs, Officer Thorne seemed to realize there was nothing there. With a grunt, he gestured that Elijah could repack his bag. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the mistake. Shaking, Elijah hastily shoved his belongings back into his backpack. As he zipped it up, Brenda finally handed him his boarding pass. "You can board," she said, her voice cold and flat. "We will be notifying the cabin crew to keep an eye on you." It wasn't a clearance, it was a threat. As Elijah walked down the jet bridge, the stares of the other passengers felt like 1,000 tiny needles. The excitement he'd felt just 10 minutes ago had evaporated, replaced by a profound sense of shame and a cold, simmering anger. The journey had barely begun, and he already felt like he didn't belong. He stepped onto the aircraft, into the calm, luxurious first-class cabin, but the feeling of being an intruder, an outsider, a risk, followed him like a shadow. The first-class cabin of a Stellara Air 747 was designed to be an oasis of calm, soft lighting, muted tones of cream and silver, and pods that offered complete privacy. As Elijah found his seat 2A, a spacious suite by the window, he tried to take a deep breath and let the tranquility of the space wash over him. He wanted to forget the humiliation at the gate to reclaim the excitement of his trip. A flight attendant approached him, her smile wide but not quite reaching her eyes. Her name tag read Karen Miller. She was the lead flight attendant for the first-class cabin, a woman who carried herself with an air of absolute authority. "Good evening, sir. Welcome aboard," she said, her voice professionally cheerful. "Can I get you a pre-departure beverage? Some champagne, perhaps?" "Just some water, please," Elijah said quietly. As she turned to get it, her tablet attached to her wrist chimed with a new message. Elijah saw her eyes scan it quickly. Her posture stiffened. She glanced back at him, her professional smile tightening into a thin, wary line. Brenda had sent her message. The security risk was now her problem. From that moment on, the atmosphere changed. Karen Miller's service, which was effusively warm to the other passengers, became clipped and cold whenever she interacted with Elijah. When she delivered his water, she placed it on the edge of his console with a sharp click, avoiding eye contact. Elijah tried to ignore it. He stowed his backpack settled into his seat and focused on the window, watching the ground crew make their final preparations. The massive Rolls-Royce Trent engine just outside his window was a marvel of engineering. He took out his phone to take a picture of it, an instinct born of pure admiration. "Sir, please put your phone away." Karen's voice cut through his thoughts, sharp and accusatory. "We are still on the ground. All cellular services must be disabled." "It's on airplane mode," Elijah explained, showing her the screen. "I was just taking a photo of the engine. It is airline policy that all electronic devices are stowed during final ground procedures," she said, her voice brooking no argument. The man across the aisle was still openly texting on his phone, but Karen paid him no mind. Her focus was solely on Elijah. Feeling another wave of frustration, Elijah put his phone away. The plane pushed back from the gate and began its slow taxi to the runway. The takeoff was powerful, a roaring ascent that normally would have filled Elijah with exhilaration. Tonight, it just felt like a mechanical process, carrying him further away from any sense of comfort or safety. Once they were at cruising altitude, the meal service began. Karen took the orders from the other passengers with charm, laughing at a joke from the man in the suit and discussing wine pairings with the woman in 3B. When she got to Elijah, her notepad was already closed. "We have the beef fillet or the pan-seared halibut," she stated without any of the descriptive flair she'd offered the others. "I'll have the beef, please," Elijah said. "Fine," she replied, and moved on. The subtle hostility was suffocating. Every time she walked past his seat, he could feel her eyes on him. He tried to lose himself in a movie, but he couldn't concentrate. He felt like a specimen under a microscope. An hour into the flight, he needed to use the restroom. He got up and walked towards the front of the cabin. The fasten seatbelt sign was off, but as he approached the galley, Karen stepped out, blocking his path. "Where are you going, sir?" she asked, her arms crossed. "To the lavatory," Elijah said, gesturing towards the door right behind her. "The forward lavatory is for crew use only right now. Please return to your seat. You can use the one in the rear of the cabin." This was a blatant lie. A passenger had just exited the same lavatory seconds before. It was a rule she had invented on the spot, another way to assert her control to remind him that he was being watched. "But—" Elijah started to protest, but the look in her eyes stopped him. It was a mixture of defiance and disdain. Arguing would only make it worse. Defeated, he turned around to walk back through the business-class cabin to the other restroom. As he did, he noticed another passenger watching the exchange with a concerned expression. She was a woman in her 60s with intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor. She caught Elijah's gaze and gave him a small, sympathetic nod. When he returned to his seat, feeling more isolated than ever, he decided to just try and sleep. He was exhausted. He reclined his seat into a fully flat bed and closed his eyes. But sleep wouldn't come. He could hear Karen whispering to another flight attendant in the galley. He couldn't make out the words, but he heard the tone, urgent, conspiratorial. And he heard his seat number 2A. He lay there in the dark, the drone of the engines a constant reminder of his confinement. He was trapped at 35,000 feet in a luxurious prison watched by a guard who had already judged and convicted him. The trip of a lifetime had turned into a 7-hour ordeal, and the worst was yet to come. The woman who had given Elijah the sympathetic look was Dr. Annabelle Foster, a professor of sociology at Columbia University, who specialized in studies of institutional bias. She had observed the entire sequence of events with a growing sense of academic and personal horror, the gate agent's pointed questions, the flight attendant's dismissive tone, the fabricated rule about the lavatory. It was a textbook case of prejudice in action, and it was making her deeply uncomfortable. Meanwhile, in the galley, Karen Miller's anxiety, fed by Brenda Walsh's initial warning, was spiraling into full-blown paranoia. She had interpreted Elijah's every action through the most sinister lens possible. His photo of the engine was surveillance. His request to use the restroom was an attempt to get near the cockpit. His quietness was unnerving. She refilled a glass of champagne for a passenger and then made a decision. She picked up the intercom phone and requested to speak with the captain. "Captain Davies, this is Karen. I'm sorry to disturb you, but I have a security concern in the first-class cabin." Captain Robert Davies was a veteran pilot with over 30 years of experience. He was unflappable, methodical, and had an unshakable faith in the judgment of his senior crew. "Go ahead, Karen." His voice crackled back. "It's the passenger in 2A, she said, her voice a hushed, urgent whisper. "He was flagged at the gate in JFK. He's been acting erratically. He was taking photos of the engine. He tried to approach the cockpit under the pretense of using the lavatory. And he's just... I have a very bad feeling, Captain. The crew is on edge." She embellished, twisting Elijah's quiet, intimidated behavior into something menacing. She failed to mention her own provocative actions. In the sterile, blue-lit cockpit, Captain Davies exchanged a look with his first officer. In a post-9/11 world, no concern from a cabin crew, no matter how small, could be ignored. The phrase, "flagged at the gate," was the clincher. It suggested this wasn't just one flight attendant's jitters. It was a concern that had originated on the ground. "What is your recommendation, Karen?" Davies asked. "I don't feel comfortable continuing the flight to London with him on board," she said, the gravity of her own words hanging in the air. "I believe he poses a credible threat." Captain Davies was silent for a moment, processing the immense implications of what she was suggesting. Diverting a transatlantic flight was a monumental decision. It would cost the airline hundreds of thousands of dollars in fuel landing fees and passenger compensation. It would cause a logistical nightmare. But the protocol was clear: safety, and the perception of safety trumped everything. He trusted his lead flight attendant. "Understood," Captain Davies said, his voice now grim. "We're over eastern Canada. The closest major airport is Halifax. We'll divert to Halifax Stanfield. Have the crew prepare, but do not alarm the passengers. And keep a close eye on 2A. "Copy that, Captain," Karen said, a wave of relief and self-righteous validation washing over her. Back in the cabin, Elijah had finally drifted into a light, uneasy sleep. He was awoken by a change in the engine's tone and a gentle descending sensation. He opened his eyes, confused. A glance at the flight map on his screen confirmed it. They were no longer heading northeast towards the UK. They were descending, and the plane's icon was pointed towards Nova Scotia. A few minutes later, Captain Davies's voice came over the PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to an unforeseen minor security issue on board, and out of an abundance of caution, we will be diverting our flight to Halifax, Nova Scotia. We have already begun our descent and should be on the ground in approximately 20 minutes. We apologize for the inconvenience and will provide more information once we have landed. Cabin crew, please prepare for landing." A confused murmur rippled through the aircraft. Passengers looked at each other, a mixture of annoyance and anxiety on their faces. Elijah's heart began to pound in his chest. A security issue. He knew with a sickening certainty that he was the issue. The 20-minute descent was the longest of his life. He sat frozen, staring out the window at the dark Canadian landscape appearing below. Karen Miller and another flight attendant stood at the front of the cabin, their arms crossed, their eyes fixed directly on him. They weren't just watching him anymore. They were guarding him. As the plane touched down in Halifax with a jarring thud, he felt his last shred of hope disappear. The aircraft taxied to a remote part of the airfield, far from the main terminal, where several vehicles with flashing lights were waiting. The seatbelt sign pinged off, but no one moved. Then the forward door opened. Two uniformed officers of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, stepped aboard. They were large, imposing figures, their faces grim. Karen Miller pointed directly at Elijah. "That's him," she said. "Seat 2A. One of the officers walked down the aisle and stopped next to his seat. Every passenger in the first and business class cabins was craning their neck to watch. "Sir," the officer said, his voice polite but firm, "I'm going to have to ask you to come with me. Please stand up slowly and bring your carry-on bag." Elijah's blood ran cold. This couldn't be happening. He looked at the faces of the other passengers. Some looked afraid, some angry, some pitiful. He saw Dr. Foster, her face pale with shock and outrage. Numbly, he stood up and pulled his backpack from the overhead bin. As the RCMP officers escorted him towards the front of the plane, a man in business class muttered, "Good riddance." Walking past Karen Miller, Elijah looked her in the eye. He saw no remorse, no doubt. Only the cold, hard certainty of a person who believed she had done the right thing, that she had saved them all from a danger that existed only in her imagination. As he stepped out of the plane and into the cold, windy Nova Scotian night, the humiliation was complete. He was alone, accused, and thousands of miles from anyone who could help him. Or so he thought. The interrogation room at Halifax Stanfield was a small, windowless box painted a sterile shade of beige. It smelled faintly of stale coffee and disinfectant. Elijah sat on a hard plastic chair, his backpack at his feet. For 2 hours he had been questioned by 2 RCMP officers and a Canadian air security official. He answered their questions calmly and truthfully, his initial terror slowly being replaced by a weary resignation. He explained who he was, why he was traveling, what was in his notebook, and why he was using a flight tracking app. They listened, their expressions unreadable. They took his phone and passport. They treated him not as a teenager on a trip, but as a calculated threat that needed to be dismantled. Finally, after another hour of sitting in silence, one of the officers, a man named Corporal Martis, re-entered the room. His demeanor had shifted slightly. The hard suspicion was gone, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. "Mr. Scott," Martis began, "we've been unable to find any evidence of criminal intent. However, the airline has filed a formal complaint, and based on the crew's report, we can't simply let you go. We need to verify your story. You're entitled to 1 phone call." 1 phone call. The cliché was suddenly his reality. His hands were trembling as he took his phone back from the officer. He had only one person to call. He scrolled through his contacts and pressed the name Dad. It was nearly 100 a.m. in New York. The phone rang 3 times before a groggy voice answered. "Eli, is everything okay? Did you land?" Tears that Elijah had been holding back for hours began to well up in his eyes. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Dad, I'm not in London." Samuel Scott was instantly awake. The sleep vanished from his voice, replaced by sharp concern. "What do you mean you're not in London? Where are you?" I'm in Halifax, in Canada," Elijah choked out. "They diverted the plane. Dad, they pulled me off. They said I was a security risk." Silence on the other end of the line. For a moment, Elijah was afraid the call had dropped, but it was the silence of a powerful mind processing an impossible reality. "Say that again," Samuel said, his voice dangerously quiet. Elijah took a shaky breath and recounted the entire story, starting with Brenda. At the gate, the random search, Karen's hostility on the plane, the lavatory incident, and finally the RCMP, escorting him off in front of everyone. As Samuel listened, his concern morphed into a cold, diamond-hard fury. This wasn't just an overzealous employee. This was a catastrophic failure of the very principles he had built his company on. His son, his own son, had been victimized by the prejudice of the people he employed. "Elijah, listen to me," Samuel said, his voice a blade of steel. "Are you safe right now? Are they treating you well?" "I'm fine. They're just holding me," Elijah replied. "Put Corporal Mathis on the phone," Samuel commanded. Elijah handed the phone to the officer. "My father wants to speak to you." Mathis took the phone, a look of professional skepticism on his face. "This is Corporal Mathis." He listened for a moment, his expression slowly changing from skepticism to confusion, and then to dawning shock. "Yes, sir. I understand, sir. Yes, Samuel Scott. The Samuel Scott. The owner of—" "Oh." The officer's back went ramrod straight. "Yes, sir. I understand completely. He's not under arrest, just detained for questioning. Of course, we will await your arrival." Mathis handed the phone back to Elijah, his face now pale. He looked at the 17-year-old boy in the hoodie, not as a suspect, but as the epicenter of an international incident. "Your father is on his way," Mathis said, his voice suddenly respectful. "He's taking a private jet from New York. He'll be here in under 2 hours." On the other end of the line, Samuel was already making his second call before the first had even fully disconnected. He dialed Cynthia Rodriguez, his chief operating officer. "Cynthia, wake up. We have a 5-alarm fire." He said no preamble. "Flight SA-101 from JFK to Heathrow. Why did it divert to Halifax?" Cynthia, a woman accustomed to 3 a.m. emergencies, was already typing on her keyboard. "One moment, Samuel. The captain's initial report says, 'Onboard security threat.' They're removing a passenger. The passenger is my son." Samuel said the words, hanging like ice in the air. There was a stunned silence. "You're Elijah?" "Yes. Get me Captain Robert Davies on his satellite phone, now. Get me the manifest, the crew list, the gate agent's log from JFK B-24. I want the name of every single person who interacted with my son. Scramble the Gulf Stream. I'm heading to the airport in 10 minutes. And Cynthia." Samuel paused, his voice dropping to a low, intense growl. "Ground that plane. No one, not the crew, not the passengers, is going anywhere until I get there." The machine that was Stellara Air, a global corporation with tens of thousands of employees, began to move. But it wasn't moving to contain a security threat. It was moving at the command of its creator, a furious father coming to get his son. And every single person on flight SA-101, from the captain in the cockpit to the gate agent back in New York was about to understand the true magnitude of what they had done. Aboard flight SA-1001, parked on the desolate Halifax tarmac, the passengers were growing restless. For 2 hours they had been given no information, their frustration mounting. The crew led by Karen Miller initially felt a sense of vindicated relief. They had neutralized a threat. They were heroes. Captain Davies sat in the cockpit, filing his preliminary report, justifying the multi-million-dollar decision to divert. He was confident he had followed procedure, confident he had made the right call based on the information provided by his trusted crew. Then the satellite phone rang. It was the COO, Cynthia Rodriguez, her voice strained and urgent. "Captain Davies, I'm patching you through to Mr. Scott." Davies frowned. A call from the CEO in the middle of the night about a diversion was unheard of. He expected a reprimand for the cost, but he was prepared to defend his actions. "Davies here," he said. "Captain." Samuel Scott's voice was unnervingly calm, a quiet storm on the line. "You diverted your flight because of a security threat. I want you to describe this threat to me, in detail." Proudly, Davies recounted the report he'd received from Karen Miller, the suspicious passenger, the gate flag, the photos, the attempt to approach the cockpit. He presented it as a clear-cut case of proactive safety measures. When he finished, there was a beat of silence. Then Samuel spoke again. "The passenger in 2A, his name is Elijah Scott. He is a 17-year-old honor student. He is my son." The world in the cockpit tilted on its axis. Captain Davies felt the blood drain from his face. His first officer, who had been listening on his headset, stared at him, his mouth agape. "Sir, Mr. Scott, I had no idea." Davies stammered the words, feeling like ash in his mouth. "That," Samuel replied, his voice lethally soft, "is precisely the problem. You had a report from a panicked flight attendant, and you diverted a 757 without speaking a single word to the passenger in question. You didn't look at him. You didn't assess the situation yourself. You accepted a biased second-hand report and treated my son like a terrorist." "I was following procedure," Davies began weakly. "Your procedure is broken," Samuel roared, the calm finally shattering. "You are to remain on that aircraft. Your crew is to remain on that aircraft. None of you are to speak to anyone until I get there. Do you understand me, Captain?" "Yes, sir," Davies whispered, his career flashing before his eyes. He hung up the phone, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. He looked at his first officer. "We have made a catastrophic mistake." He immediately went back into the cabin. The atmosphere among the crew had changed. The news had filtered from the COO's office to the flight operations manager and down to the crew scheduler who had called the plane. Their triumphant mood had evaporated, replaced by sickening dread. Karen Miller looked as if she'd seen a ghost. Her face was ashen. Her self-righteousness had crumbled into sheer terror. Less than 2 hours later, a sleek private Gulfstream GE-50 descended through the dark and landed on the Halifax runway, taxiing to a stop beside the hulking Boeing 737. The door opened, and Samuel Scott descended the steps. He was not dressed in a CEO's suit, but in jeans and a dark jacket he'd thrown on. But he radiated an authority more powerful than any suit could convey. He was met on the tarmac by Corporal Mathis, who now looked like a chastened schoolboy. "Mr. Scott, your son is in the private lounge. He is safe." "Take me to him," Samuel said. The reunion was quiet. Elijah saw his father and just collapsed into his arms, the tension and fear of the last several hours finally releasing in a flood of silent tears. Samuel held him tightly, whispering, "I'm here. It's over. I've got you." After a few minutes, Samuel looked at Elijah. "I have to go deal with this, son. Will you be okay here for a little while?" Elijah nodded, wiping his eyes. He felt safe for the first time in 8 hours. Samuel walked back out onto the tarmac and boarded Flight SA Sandiahono 1. The silence in the cabin was deafening. He walked through the aisles, his eyes scanning the faces of the passengers before making his way to the front. He stood at the front of the first-class cabin. He first addressed the passengers, his voice calm and commanding. He apologized sincerely for the diversion and the terror they must have felt. He announced that everyone on the flight would be fully refunded, given 100,000 airline miles, and that those who wished to continue on to London would be rebooked on a new flight with a fresh crew, while the rest would be flown back to New York. Then his eyes found the crew. He dismissed the junior members. "Just Captain Davies, Miss Miller," he said. He also beckoned Dr. Annabel Foster forward, whom an RCMP officer had identified as a witness who had asked to give a statement on Elijah's behalf. The four of them, Samuel Davies, a trembling Karen Miller, and Dr. Foster, stood in the galley. "Dr. Foster," Samuel began, "I understand you witnessed the interactions. Please tell me what you saw." Dr. Foster recounted everything calmly and precisely. Karen's hostile tone, the invented lavatory rule, the constant targeted surveillance. Her academic mind provided a clear, unbiased, and damning account. When she was finished, Samuel turned to Karen. "Ms. Miller, you have been with this airline for 12 years. You have received our highest service awards. You are trained to de-escalate, to serve, to provide comfort. But what you did tonight was poison. You were not ensuring safety. You were profiling. You saw a black teenager in a hoodie, and you saw a threat. You let your prejudice override your training, your professionalism, and your basic human decency. Do you have anything to say?" Karen burst into tears. I was scared. The report from the gate. I thought I was doing the right thing." "The right thing?" Samuel shot back, his voice low and intense. "The right thing would have been to have a conversation, to treat him like a human being. Not once did you do that. You made him an object of your fear." He then turned to Captain Davies. "And you, Captain, you are the commander of this vessel, the final authority. You hold the lives of 300 people in your hands. But you abdicated your responsibility. You hid in your cockpit and took the word of a frightened employee without doing your own due diligence. You failed as a captain, and you failed as a leader." Davies stood stiffly, shame radiating from him. "There's no excuse, sir." "No," Samuel agreed. "There isn't. Both of you are suspended effective immediately. You will be flown to New York, where you will meet with HR and our legal team. I suggest you find your own legal counsel." He turned and walked away, leaving them in the ruins of their careers. His final stop was the cockpit. He picked up the sat phone and called Cynthia. "Get Brenda Walsh, the gate agent from B24 at JFK, on the phone. Tell her to be in my office at 9 a.m. She can bring her union rep." The reckoning was swift, cold, and absolute. But for Samuel Scott, it wasn't over. Punishing the guilty was only the first step. The real work was just beginning. The days that followed were a maelstrom. The incident aboard Flight SA-101 could not be contained. A passenger in business class had discreetly filmed the RCMP officers escorting a bewildered Elijah off the plane. The grainy 10-second clip uploaded to Twitter with the caption, "Stellara Air flight to London, diverted to Canada to remove a teenager, SA-101, was the spark that ignited a wildfire. Within hours, the story was everywhere, fueled by leaks from frustrated passengers and anonymous sources within the Halifax airport. The media narrative was explosive and polarizing. Headlines screamed from every major news outlet. Stellara Air accused of racial profiling after forcibly removing CEO's own son from flight. Civil rights organizations issued scathing condemnations. Talk shows debated the incident endlessly. On one side, pundits championed the crew's actions under the banner of safety first, arguing that in a post-9/11 world, any and all perceived threats must be taken seriously. On the other, commentators decried it as a textbook case of flying while black, a disgusting and public display of ingrained prejudice. Stellara Air's stock, a titan of the market, stumbled, shedding nearly 10% of its value in 48 hours, as the hashtag #BoycottStellara trended globally. For Samuel Scott, the public relations nightmare was a distant secondary concern. His entire focus was on the quiet, withdrawn young man sitting across from him in their suite at the Savoy in London, the Farnborough Air Show. The entire purpose of their trip was completely forgotten. They had the best suite in the hotel overlooking the Thames, but Elijah kept the curtains drawn, the room shrouded in a perpetual twilight. He barely spoke, picking at the 5-star room service meals and staring for hours at a blank television screen. The trauma of the event had wrapped him in a cloak of silence. Samuel felt a profound, gut-wrenching guilt. He was the one who had insisted Elijah fly alone. He was the one whose last-minute meeting had left his son vulnerable. He had built an empire to give his son the world, only for that same empire to mistake him for a threat and chew him up. The first breakthrough came on the third day. Samuel was on a tense video call with the Stellara Air Board of Directors who were panicking about the financial fallout. "Samuel, we need a decisive strategy," urged Arthur Kensington, the board chairman, his face a mask of patrician concern. "We've terminated the employees involved. Now we issue a formal apology, make a sizable donation to a relevant charity, and we ride this out. A standard containment protocol." "There is nothing standard about this." "Arthur," Samuel retorted, his voice dangerously low. "My son was treated like a criminal by my employees. A containment protocol is what you do for an oil spill. This is a cancer in the culture of our company. You don't contain cancer, you cut it out." "Be that as it may, the market is hemorrhaging." From across the room, Elijah spoke, his voice raspy from disuse. "Were they fired?" Samuel immediately swiveled in his chair, his attention snapping away from the board. "Yes, Eli. Captain Davies, Karen Miller, and Brenda Walsh. Their employment with Stellara Air has been terminated." Elijah absorbed this, his expression unreadable. "Will they get jobs at other airlines?" The question hung in the air. Samuel knew the answer was likely yes. They would be quietly hired by another carrier in a year or so. The incident would be a black mark, but not a career-ending one. "Possibly," Samuel admitted truthfully. "So it doesn't matter," Elijah said, a note of bitter finality in his voice. "You fire them, and the next Brenda, the next Karen will just take their place. The problem isn't the people, Dad. It's the feeling they had when they looked at me. You can't fire a feeling." In that moment, Elijah had articulated the very heart of the problem with more clarity than any of his high-paid executives could. This wasn't about a few bad apples. The entire orchard was sick. That conversation was the turning point. Samuel excused himself from the board meeting, promising to deliver a comprehensive action plan within the week. He then sat with Elijah, not as a CEO or a titan of industry, but simply as a father. He told his son stories he had long buried. The time early in his career he was mistaken for a valet at a conference he was speaking at. The promotion he was inexplicably passed over for in favor of a less qualified white colleague. The countless small cuts and indignities that he had absorbed on his climb to the top. "I thought that by getting to the very top, by building my own table, I could protect you from all of this." Samuel confessed, his voice thick with a rare vulnerability. I thought the name Scott on your ticket would be a shield. Instead, they never even bothered to look at the name. They just saw a young black man, and their fear did the rest. I have to fix it, Eli. Not just for you, but for everyone who will ever step onto one of our planes. Back in New York, Samuel launched the most extensive internal investigation in the company's history. The findings were damning. They uncovered a pattern of microaggressions and dismissed complaints. Brenda Walsh had been informally flagged twice for her abrasive handling of non-English-speaking passengers. Karen Miller had a complaint on her file from a Sikh passenger who felt he was being unreasonably monitored during a flight. Each incident had been logged by middle management and then buried, deemed not serious enough to warrant more than a verbal warning. It was a systemic failure of accountability. 1 week later, Samuel Scott stood on a stage erected inside a massive Stellara air hangar at JFK. The event was a mandatory company-wide town hall with thousands of uniformed employees gathered before him and tens of thousands more watching via a global live stream. The air was thick with tension and uncertainty. He didn't read from a teleprompter. He spoke from the heart, his voice raw and powerful. He recounted the entire story of Elijah's journey, his words painting a vivid picture of his son's excitement, turning to humiliation and terror. He held up a copy of Elijah's notebook, its pages filled with his elegant, complex drawings. This notebook, the manifestation of a young man's dream to contribute to the very industry we represent, was seen as a threat. Samuel declared, his voice echoing through the vast space. Our company mission statement promises dignity in every journey. But when my son needed it most, we offered him suspicion. We offered him accusation. We failed. And as your CEO, that failure is mine and mine alone. He then laid out his plan. It wasn't a simple apology tour. It was a revolution. He announced the immediate formation of a new independent department, the Office of Equity and Accountable Conduct, which would report directly to his office. He announced the initial funding for this office, an unprecedented $50 million. Its first mandate was the creation and immediate implementation of a radical new training protocol. This will not be another optional seminar on diversity that you can click through on a computer, he stated, his eyes scanning the crowd. This will be an intensive, immersive, and ongoing program for every single employee, from the baggage handlers to my executive board. It will focus on identifying and combating implicit bias, on de-escalation, and on empathetic communication. It will be rigorous, it will be difficult, and it will be mandatory. Then came the final, most personal detail. This entire program, he announced, his voice softening slightly, will be known as the Elijah Scott Initiative. When he told Elijah about the name, later that evening, his son was deeply conflicted. "Dad, no. I don't want that. I don't want my name on a corporate program. I just want to go to school and be an engineer. I don't want to be a symbol." Samuel sat beside him. "I understand that, son, more than you know. But this isn't about making you a symbol or a poster child. It's about ensuring this is never forgotten. It's about accountability. In 5-10 years, when a new class of recruits is grumbling about why they have to spend a week in this training, their instructor won't give them a corporate reason. They will tell them your story. They will talk about a brilliant kid in a hoodie who was just trying to get to an air show. Your name won't be a brand. It will be our company's conscience. It will be the promise that we will never let fear and prejudice fly on our aircraft again." Elijah was quiet for a long time, the weight of his father's words settling upon him. He finally understood. This was how you fought a feeling. You gave it a name. You gave it a story. You turned a moment of shame into a permanent lesson of strength. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. The Elijah Scott Initiative became a landmark program studied by business schools and slowly, grudgingly emulated by other airlines. It didn't magically erase prejudice, but it created a powerful and lasting culture of accountability at Stellara Air. Elijah went on to MIT, where he excelled. He was no longer just the boy who was kicked off a plane. He was a brilliant young engineer with a uniquely profound understanding of the industry he was about to enter. The journey was no longer just about conquering the skies, but about ensuring they were open and dignified for everyone. The story of Elijah Scott is a powerful and unsettling reminder that prejudice isn't always loud and hateful. Sometimes it's a quiet assumption, a suspicious glance, a judgment made in a split second by someone in a position of authority. It shows how easily a dream trip can become a nightmare, and how a simple hoodie can be perceived as a threat. But more than that, it's a story about accountability. It's about what happens when those quiet assumptions are dragged into the light. What Samuel Scott did was more than just fire the employees responsible. He forced his entire company to confront the systemic bias that allowed this to happen. The Elijah Scott Initiative stands as a testament to the idea that we can and must do better, that a moment of deep personal pain can be transformed into a catalyst for widespread positive change. This story isn't just about an airline, it's about the society we all live in. If this story moved you or made you think, please take a moment to hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that matter, and don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an update. We want to know your thoughts. What would you have done if you were a passenger on that flight? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for listening.